So, more turmoil in the Middle East, with 3 U.S. soldiers being killed and 34 more injured after a drone attack by Iran backed militant groups. That's just an accusation by the U.S. They haven't actually taken accountability for that or claimed that it was them yet, but 3 American service members were killed and at the U.S. base near the Syrian border in Jordan. This marks the first time American troops have been killed in the Middle East since the Israel-Hamas conflict began, highlighting escalating tensions in the region. President Biden stated that the attack was carried out by radical Iranian-backed militant groups operating in Syria and Iran, calling it, quote, a despicable and wholly unjust attack. He added that the 3 American service members who lost their lives were patriots and that the U.S. will hold those responsible accountable. Despite Biden's statement, no specific group has claimed responsibility for the attack. That being said, a number of Iran-backed terrorist groups, including Houthi rebels and Hezbollah, have launched more than 158 assaults on the U.S. allied forces in a show of solidarity with Hamas in its war with Israel. So what do you think the strategy is here for these groups attacking the U.S. forces, or what do you think they hope to get out of it?
It's interesting. I think this is something they've been planning. Obviously, any of these Iranian-backed groups, obviously there's been 158 bombings against U.S. and allied groups outside of Israel from Iranian-backed groups like the Houthi rebels and Hezbollah just since the conflict began on October 7th. So this was their intention. This got through. There's questions being asked like, how did it get through? How did they actually land something here? Because all the other ones, nothing had. They were able to knock them out of the sky. So I think you're going to do some internal figuring out of exactly what went wrong, because their weapons technology is so much more advanced. I am actually surprised that they were able to penetrate for whatever reason they did. But I think this puts the U.S. in a bit of a precarious situation, right? Because, we accept certain things in these wars that I'm coming to learn as I get older. We're allowing Ukraine to fight a proxy war for the United States against Russia. We're allowing that. We know what's happening. The West is funding. Everybody knows, but we're allowing it. The red line is putting troops on the ground, right? And then you look at the Middle East. You're like, okay, well, we're allowing all these rebel groups that we know are Iran-backed, that are coming from all these different countries, and we don't hold the countries responsible. For some reason, we accept that and we go, it's okay. It's an acceptable part of war that we won't let this turn into a global conflict. You also let Hezbollah attack, from Lebanon. You allow certain things, and I don't really know why. I don't know who draws these lines or what makes this sort of a red line issue. But when you look at American troops being killed, you run into a bit of a problem, right? Because these imaginary lines that I'm talking about, they're made up by politicians, right? They're made up and they just go, okay, we'll accept this, that's fine. And they pitch it how they pitch it in the media, and then it's no big deal. But when American lives are lost, America does one thing. They retaliate disproportionately. That's who they are. So now that three Americans are dead, 34 plus are injured, there's going to be a mess. They're going to do something that's going to be disproportionate. If they do something that is disproportionate, what does that look like? Because the American people are going to demand it. The politicians can no longer say, well, it's okay that proxy wars are happening. Well, it's okay, these rebel groups, we can't really tie it to these people. But now that some Americans are dead, they're going to have to do something wild. And I'm wondering, is this the thing that tips it over? Is this what turns it into a legitimate global conflict?
So it's funny because I agree with the philosophy of, if you hit us, I'll hit you 10 times harder.
Sure.
I agree with that even on an individual level. It's like, if you come and get in my face and shove me and push me or hit me, like, I am going to try to inflict way more damage. Yeah. I'm not just going to be like, okay, I'm going 1 for 1 on a push.
No. If you come at me, one of us is going to stop moving.
So I agree with that. But then on the opposite side, when it comes to America, I think their foreign policy has been terrible over the last 5 decades, 6 decades even, where it's like they're walking around puffed up thing. And then when somebody pushes them, they're like, oh, what? And it's like, you've been egging it on. You've been eyeballing. You've been sizing up everybody in this bar.
Flirt with that guy's girlfriend.
Flirt with that guy's girl. Yeah. And then you act like all of a sudden that was just unjustified that somebody came up and pushed you.
Right.
And you kind of go, well, you're in their house. Like, I mean, even Iraq has been trying to say to America to get the hell out of there for a while, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I think it's a tough situation to figure out, because I also think too, no half measures, especially on this scale. Like if you're going to do something, you have to do it.
Right.
And I've pointed out that I actually think that that's Israel's mentality with their response to October 7th, which is like, if you're going to injure somebody, make sure
they're doing it.
Make sure they can't harm you back.
Yep.
But then again, I go to the other side where it's like a lot of these countries operate and militant groups operate on guerrilla warfare techniques. And it's like, look what happened in Afghanistan for over 20 years. Look what happened in Vietnam against guerrilla warfare. Typically, conventional militaries can't beat the guerrilla warfare tactics,
Right.
even though they're a much smaller, less well-armed, less organized. And that's actually part of their benefit, is because they're more mobile. Their attacks come with a little bit more of a surprise.
And they know the lay of the land.
And they know the lay of the land.
Yeah.
And then you just look at what happened in all of these conflicts. Like what did Afghanistan, what did it achieve? You fought for 20 years, you spent all of this money, and then you had to pull out, left $8 billion of weapons there that are now in the control of the very people you tried to fight.
Exactly.
And they're in power now. Then now they have the country. And you go, look, I'm not saying America shouldn't have pulled out of Afghanistan. I'm saying they shouldn't have
been there in the first place.
And actually, Dan was my buddy was making a good point the other night about, he's just like, these military generals and these contractors, it seems like they're playing a game of just the tip. They're like, if I can get just the tip in there, then I know I'm fucking in there, because like nobody's going to be able to come and pull me out of this. And then now I've got all the funding I need. I can grow my military, and then I can also sell way and more contracts. And so to me, it seems like a lot of the issue just comes down to not letting them engage in the first place, and then going like, all right, we really need to, because as soon as you engage in that kind of warfare or conflicts on that scale, then I'm even of the point where I'm like, now you have to end it. Now you have to make sure you win.
You see, I agree with all that. I think if you look at Afghanistan, it was more of a resource war. It was to fund their military industrial complex, and then just take resources out of Afghanistan.
Opium.
Yeah, that's all it was. That's all it was. So that's fine. It is what it is. Russia did it for X number of years. Then the US did it for 20 years. Like, it's just, that's the game they play. Now China's in there. If anybody doesn't know, China's now in there. They went in and shook hands with Afghans. So, they're in there peacefully, but that's what they're doing.
Yep.
Right. So anyway, then you look, but if you go back to the Middle East, they can't fight a ground war right now. They can't do it because all these rebel groups are inside other countries. It's too weird a dynamic, because you're not actually fighting a country. You're fighting a rebel group that's dispersed within all these different nations, right? So the bombing was in Jordan. Jordan's an ally, like they have like a peaceful relationship with the United States. So that base is there, and they're on the same page about it. So it's like, Jordan's not really going to push back. Do they want them there? Probably not. But the U.S. isn't going to go put ground troops in there and start fighting a war in Jordan. That's not going to happen. So then you kind of look, okay, Iraq is trying to get the U.S. military out. So they're not going to go do that either, even if it's a rebel group, because now you have a fight with Iraq. And if they go into Iran, you're looking at a world war. Like, that's why.
Yeah.
They can't do that. And I would even suggest in Yemen, like, you can't really put ground troops in there, because you're going to have a big pushback from like the legitimate government, because these are all rebel groups. So what's your only solution? Bombing them. The only thing the Americans can do are tactical bombs. It just hit all these different things. It's just, with respect to it being disproportionate, you look at what's happening in the Red Sea and how many times they've bombed Yemen now, and these Houthi rebels, they seem to know exactly where they all are. Sure. I think they bombed them a dozen times or more. But now that this has happened, and no group has taken responsibility, yet someone will, I imagine, they're going to start targeting these people. And I don't think it was the Houthi rebels. So these other rebel groups are going to be inside other nations. And I actually think Yemen might be the safest place that the U.S. could be bombing right now. I feel like they're the least, maybe not least likely, but they're on the lower end of the scale of the countries that are going to push back and cause trouble with the U.S. But if these groups, if they're like, hey, we're in Iran, now what do you do?
Yeah.
If they're like, yeah, we're in Iran, we are actually an Iran rebel group. Here's where we are. Come get me. Now you have a really, really big problem. Or if they're in Iraq, really, really big problem. So I don't know, man. Like, I could see this going very sideways, very, very quickly. I don't know, because the U.S. has no choice but to retaliate at this point.
Yeah. And then so that's where, I look at, say, because Iran is the puppet master of everything that's happening
100%.
here. Like they've obviously they're the ones funding Hamas, they're the ones funding the Hezbollah, they're the ones funding the Houthis.
Yeah.
And so you look at this and you go, okay, so what is their motive? Because I don't think they can go toe to toe with the American military.
No chance.
But then you have to go, okay, so what's their incentive here? And I've made this point before, but it seems just more and more every day that this is what they're trying to do, where if they get America to hit them hard enough to the point where all of the people that have come into the Western nations over the last decade or two can start being very aggressive in our homelands and start essentially militarizing these people here and causing essentially social disintegration.
Yeah.
I can't see any other incentive for them to be doing these things other than to destabilize from within on the Western nations.
Okay, so you think this is a longer play where you're going to see, hey, they poke the bear, and then the bear goes on a full attack, and then all of a sudden there's people in that bear's cave.
Yeah.
And they're going to start causing shit with all the little bear cubs.
Let's go to the bar analogy again. It's one of those things where it's like if you're in the bar and everybody's kind of around, they're not paying super close attention, and you're poking the guy next to you in the stomach and nobody can really see it.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden that guy turns around and smacks you right in the face.
Yeah.
You can turn to everybody in the bar and go, look what this guy just did. And then everybody is on your side and starts trying to.
Yeah. I see that. I don't think you're going to have quite the same situation though, because Americans are dead.
Yeah.
I think they're going to go, oh, you killed Americans.
Yep.
So I think that I think it's like, I'm more.
I don't mean like, I think you're going to have, say, people that were born in America have that opinion, but I don't think the people that have moved to America in the last decade were going to care that much about American soldiers.
Right. I think, well, I'm inclined to agree with you in the sense that it makes sense if you kind of think of this as a tit for tat situation. Iran and generally the Middle East can't really put up a fight against the US if it comes down to it. You need a Russia or a China involved. So what do? What's the incentive here? You poke the bear fights back. I do think that makes sense. I mean, this would be the time where I'd start paying attention to all the people crossing the border in the US. I mean, there's that guy from Azerbaijan the other day we were talking about who was the lead of some rebel group who spent 12 years in jail for what he was doing. That guy's there. And
even if you go look at the videos of people that are crossing the states in droves, you do have to ask, where are all the women and children? It's a lot of 20 to 30-year-old men.
It's a lot of able-bodied men,
you go like, what's happening here?
Yeah. It's a lot. There's a lot.
It doesn't seem like it's families trying to get a better economic life.
It doesn't seem like they're there for a better life. Now, again, I'll be honest with you. I think that at scale, people are good.
Yeah.
But I still think 10 to 20% may be bad in this group.
You know what's crazy is it doesn't even have to be 10 to 20%. There's been lots of literature on how it only takes 3% of a population, or even take it off of, say, a geopolitical scale and into a company. All it takes is to have 3% of people with nefarious actions to essentially topple an authority. So one thing that's been pointed out is more on the psychological level is that a group can't sustain more than 3% of narcissists within it, because those narcissists will start to pit everybody against each other, and they really know how to pull strings and manipulate. And it doesn't take much for destabilization to happen. So again, that's a good point. I want to be clear. I'm not looking at every single person that has moved to the Western world over the last decade and looking at it and going, all of these people are terrible or have nefarious intentions, but also being aware that it only takes an extreme minority to cause massive consequences.
No, you're right. And I think this would be a catalyst to see a lot of those people mobilize. You know what I mean? They would have a reason. And I think it depends where the bombing happens and what they do. Because if you do end up bombing in one of these countries, like let's say Iraq, well, now anybody that's aligned with Iraq that's in the US they're going to have a chip on their shoulder about it. And anybody that's allied with any Iranian-backed rebel group from wherever they are, depending on the damage caused, you're going to see this mobilization in the U.S. So yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I don't know where it goes from there, but I could see it. I could see it causing America a much bigger problem when they do sort of execute that disproportionate retaliation.
So I just did some math here though to find out what that 3% number would be. So correct me if I'm wrong, but the number is essentially 10,000 people coming across the border daily
per day right now.
Per day?
That's about it. Yeah.
Taking that to a yearly number and then taking 3% of that is 109,200 people.
Oh, that's so many.
So even
That's
if it's just,
so many.
so even if,
Oh,
so even
that's
just,
wild.
yeah. So you're like, that's not a small number of people.
That's 2,000 per state.
Yeah.
That's like obviously a little more, but basically do the dummy math. You got 2,000 people per state, you know, and that's, yeah, I mean, that's a very dangerous situation. I don't know how that plays out for America, but yeah, it's interesting. I don't want to get into longer conversation about this, but I do actually think I think we're witnessing the fall of America, and whatever that looks like rather, will look different than the fall of any other nation, because I think they're always unique in their own way. But I think we are sort of witnessing that fall. I don't know how long it takes. I don't know the gradual path. I don't know what the end result looks like, but I do think we're watching it. And I think it's because of things like this. You know, this is definitely a big part of it.